Hello dear students, today we will talk about communicative competence once again. We have talked about this in the last class and there are still some more things that I want you to know about communicative competence. So, let us first revise what we have done till now. We have talked about Berlow's sender, message, channel, receiver model and the importance of context in communication in the SMCR model. Through the SMCR model, we come to know how important context is. We've also talked about why intercultural communication is important in business. We have talked about what makes business dealings, especially in today's day and age, intercultural. We have talked about the things that make us different from each other. We have talked about the things that make our intra and interpersonal contexts different from each other. Just as a revision, intrapersonal context is the context that I have inside here, my memory, my perceptions, what I think about, the way I think about things, that is my intrapersonal context. And interpersonal context is the environment that I function in. So, we have discussed the things in our minds and outside of our bodies within our environments that make us different from each other. We have also talked about whether communication in a business setting can ever be anything but intercultural. We have discussed the definition of culture, we have discussed the definition of intercultural, if you want to term it that way, and we have also talked about, I had asked you to think about whether communication in a business setting, especially in today's day and age, can be anything but intercultural. And this is something that I will not give you an answer to. This is something that I expect you as receivers of this course, as listeners of this lecture, to think about yourselves and figure it out for yourselves. I will never give you answers, because behavioral sciences are interpretive in nature. There is never a plus and minus. We function in gray areas. The next thing that we talked about was communicative competence, and we discussed interpretive competence. We talked about sizing up situations, we talked about sizing up people, we talked about sizing up relationships. We also talked about scripts, self-monitors, high and low self-monitors, people who like to adapt themselves to different situations or who like to adjust their behaviors in different situations and their ability to do so in different situations, and those are the self-monitors. And we have talked about preconceived notions and how they affect our behavior with others. And then I had asked you to think about the implications of scripts, preconceived notions and perceptions of interpersonal relationships on interpersonal interactions, especially at work. This may seem like a lot of things, but this is something that you have to internalize as you go along. As a child, you start internalizing these things, you don't even realize it. And after going through this course, knowing the things that you do, I expect you to refine those internalizations and adjust yourselves to your environments. We talked about interpretive competence as an explanation of behavior. We talked about, we will now talk about attribution theories. Okay. We talked about the interpretive competence as an explanation of the management of the self and situations, and today we will talk about the explanations of behavior and how we explain other people's behavior. And an important part of this is the attribution theories, and attribution theories are theories that are concerned with how the average person infers the cause of social behavior. Now, attribution theories typically deal with identifying attribution biases. We really need to find out what we attribute things to and what are our biases in these attributions. We have a personality bias towards each other, in which we explain other people's behavior in terms of their personality dispositions. We say this is the characteristic of a person, so and so is an introvert, so the person did this. So and so is an extrovert, so the person is very good at talking to people. Looking at me teaching this course, you may never believe that I used to be an introvert. If my friends view this lecture, if my college friends view this lecture, they will be surprised to see me talking to an audience that I don't even know about. And I used to be labeled as an introvert, and people who know me closely know that I'm an introvert, but my students refuse to believe that. So we attribute people's behavior, the behavior that we see, to whatever we perceive them to be. And the greater the difference there is in their behavior from our expectations, the greater they deviate, the greater their behavior deviates from our expectations, the greater is our personality bias towards them. We feel that this person just doesn't fit into the mold that I had, this person just doesn't fit into that classification, that category of an outgoing person. So, so this person, even though the person is not, I mean, we have certain notions, certain definitions of what a behavior should look like. An ideal student should be outgoing, an ideal student should be committed, an ideal student should be liking books, should be liking the library, and when my students don't do that, I say there's something wrong with this person, because students are supposed to be outgoing. So when I see a student who's introverted, who may be studying in the room, but I don't see that, I feel no, there's something wrong. Or if I see a student who is just too boisterous and too outgoing, and I say no, this person is just not serious enough about his studies, and that's not right. That's where our personality biases come in. That as a student in India, you're supposed to be engrossed in books, and yes, there is a time for fun and play, but you're not supposed to, when we were growing up, we were not really, we were supposed to keep our education and entertainment separate, and these days we talk about edutainment, which is a new concept. So the difference in the behaviors, you must have seen your teachers cribbing about, we all complain about how our students are, how non-serious our students are, and we are all very pleasantly surprised when many of these apparently non-serious students come up with beautiful projects, very well thought out, very creative ideas, and very well researched work. And so that is, we have these personality biases that are eventually shaken up, but when we start dealing with these students, these things do creep into our interactions. The other bias we have is the situational bias towards self, which is the attribution of our own behavior to situational factors. When I am assessing others, then I say so and so's personality has this flaw, or so and so's personality is in this manner different from what it should be like. But when it's me, I say the situations are to blame. I am okay. And this is a general tendency for all of us. This is a means of self-preservation in some ways, but this is a general tendency. So we have a situational bias towards self. I am not the one responsible. It is my environment, it is my situation that is responsible, and all of these things creep into the way in which we design our messages. I am giving you all this information so you know what is in fact really affecting the way we design our messages. We also have a bias towards groups. We explain the behavior of members of highly stereotyped out groups, the word there should be groups, we do not belong to, differently than the behavior of in-group members, such as our own friends, associates, or ethnic groups. So out groups are the groups that are not that we don't belong to, that are very, very different, that are stereotypically very different from the group that we belong to, and that are outside of our immediate frame of reference. So for example, doctors. For a teacher of communication, doctors is a highly stereotyped out group. Very respectable, very noble profession. All doctors are supposed to be very intelligent. Of course, there's a lot of merit to that, otherwise they don't get into medical colleges, but we slot people into a different category. We say all lawyers are supposed to be experts in communication, in negotiations, in conflict management, and the more you know about lawyers, you will realize that they are also, we also think that they are experts at research. So we explain their behaviors, because of we have a bias towards these groups, and we explain the behaviors of our out group members very differently from our in group members. When we talk about our in groups are your family, your community, your professional group. Here when I am here, I say my in group is IIT Kharagpur. So even if I have differences of opinion here within this campus with someone, when I am outside, we are part of the same family. So when I am in here, my in group is Vinod Gupta School of Management, or the faculty in communication, or the faculty in behavioral sciences. But when I am out of these four walls of the campus, then my in group is the faculty at IIT Kharagpur. And you know, when I am here in Bengal, my in group is Punjabis. So all Punjabis I will be close to. So these are the groups that we can affiliate with, and this is something we had talked about in the class when we discussed the differences, the things that make us different, and the things that decide or help us define our identities. We attribute the positive behavior by in-group members to their personal dispositions, while negative behavior is explained in terms of situational factors, and this is something that has been proven by research. When it comes to our in-group members, we say that everything they do nicely is because of their personal characteristics, while their negative behavior is explained in terms of situational factors. Somebody else is responsible because we feel that we are connected. So it's again a means of self-preservation. When I say self, it's not only me, it is also the group I belong to. And if it's me or the group I belong to, I want to defend them or myself. And I say, well, whatever they did, if it's a negative experience, they were not at fault. Something around them that they could not control was at fault. In case of out-group members, positive behavior is explained as situationally produced, while negative behavior is seen as the product of personality or group culture. So when we talk about the out group members, the positive behavior that we have is the positive behavior expressed by them is attributed to situational factors. It's somebody else or something in their environment must have been going right, and their negative behavior is assumed to be a function of their personality or the group culture. These people do things this way. Okay? All doctors come home late, all doctors have late hours. That's not true. But we say, well, if it's a doctor and if the doctor cannot make it to a party, maybe this person is a workaholic. All doctors are workaholics. So you know, if I'm friends with some doctor and the doctor is usually late for some social event, I say, wo to doctors ka to kaam hi hai, or the doctors do things this way, and so is a workaholic. So it's like the personality or the group culture. Because the person is a doctor, the person is not being able to come. If the person was maybe a teacher, the person would have taken time out, you know, or adjusted hours, but because the person is a doctor, the person is not able to take time out. So we do these things and we have other biases, and that is how we design our messages when we are dealing with these people or when we are dealing with others, when we refer to these people. So when we make references to people of our in group, we design our messages differently, and when we make references to people in the out groups or in the groups that we are not a part of, we design messages differently. We also have a bias towards cultures, and we will talk about this more when we talk about high and low context cultures. In individualistic cultures, behavior is usually attributed to individual personality characteristics. Okay? And in collectivistic cultures, even individual behavior is usually attributed to situational factors, and I will discuss more about this when we talk about high and low context cultures and how these are very different. So I just want you to think about these things and why this must be happening, and I'll come back to you to these things in another class. Now, because of all these things, I am sure you must have realized the importance of context in competence. We talked about what competence meant. Competence is the effectiveness. We discussed that. Competence is how effective or how well you are able to send your message across, putting it very, very crudely. some things about context and competence. One, meaning and information are socially constructed. We decide the environment that we function in, our intra and interpersonal contexts decide what we interpret as the meaning of a situation and what we communicate to other people. So, the meaning that we transmit, the meaning we receive, the meaning we make out of situations is socially constructed, and the information is also socially constructed. Believe me, there is nothing called as hard facts. Hard facts from whose point of view? There is some person recording those hard facts. If there is a human being involved, the information will be constructed socially, and I will talk about this in a minute. We also discussed Berlow's SMCR model. Please remember that a communicator's competence is a function of the interpretation of the message by the receiver of the message. A message designed in and carrying the characteristics of the sender's intra and interpersonal context, the sender's reasons for designing the message in a certain manner, and the sender's reasons for choosing the channel used to send the message, and the receiver's interpretation of why the message was designed the way it was designed and why the channel selected was selected, and the receiver's intra and interpersonal context in which the message is interpreted. This may seem like a lot of things, but this is really, whatever is coming to us is always enveloped in something. We talk about Bakhtin, it is the emotional volitional aspect of the message that gives it its meaning. Only content can be transmitted, meanings cannot. That is what Goody-Kunst said, and we talked about that earlier. So, it is the environment, it is our interpretation of the environment that gives the message its meaning. It is virtually impossible to remove all traces of context, preconceived notions, scripts and biases from any message designed and or interpreted by a human being. Please take my word for it, and if you think very, very deeply, you will realize that this is really true. You cannot remove the context from the message, it is just impossible. Okay? If a human being is involved, that is the case. Of course, if it's machine to machine, then things are simpler, and those of you who program things would probably agree with me. There is only one way of doing things, but when we are talking to human beings or when we are interpreting things, there are a million ways in which we send a message or interpret the message. With machines, we have only one way. If we do it slightly in another manner, the machine interprets it differently. So, there are very clear-cut instructions as to how to go about sending particular messages, and if you think about those things, you will realize that this is really, really true. Let's talk about communicative competence in the business environment. I told you about the history of communicative competence. I told you when it was studied, who started studying it. I also told you how it was people began to study about communicative competence and how people were trained in communicative competence. So, let's now move to, let's revise a little bit. Squires in 2001 talked about what managers do, how do managers do what they do, and what effects managers do and how they do what they do, and I had told you about these things. So, just think about these things. The nature of managerial work is such that there is a remarkable similarity in management jobs. Most management jobs are very, very alike. There are jobs in today's workplace cluster around core management roles. The jobs in today's workplace are clustered around core management roles, which are typically interpersonal, informational and decisional, and this is from Henry Mintzberg's paper called The Nature of Managerial Work, and the source of this is the book on management communication by Rourke and Singh. I had shown you that book earlier. Management skills required by managers are technical skills, which are most valuable at the entry level. They are less valuable at more senior levels because you are supposed to have internalized them by then. They are relating skills, which are very valuable across the managerial career span, and conceptual skills, which are least valuable at the entry level and more valuable at the more senior levels. So, the relating skills is what we are really talking about here. We are talking about how we interact with the others who help us in our work. Communication is invention. We talked about the creation of meaning through communication. Managers create meaning through communication. You get data, you get information from people, and then you make some sense out of it and act accordingly. Managers figure things out by talking about them as much as they talk about the things they have already figured out. Think about this. I'll leave you to interpret this. Talk is the work. There is a research has demonstrated that managers across industries spend 75% of their time in verbal interaction. And this includes one-on-one or face-to-face, telephone conversations, video teleconferencing, presentation to small groups, public speaking to larger audiences. So, you know, and these are just some of the things it includes. There are lots more. Larkin, in a paper on communicating change, said that deep down, managers believe that they are communicating effectively. In 10 years of management consulting, we have never had a manager say to us that he or she was a poor communicator. They admit to the occasional screw up, but overall, everyone without exception believes that he or she is basically a good communicator. So then what is the need? Why do we need to have this class? Why do you need to learn about communication? And I will tell you that in a minute. This is because the industry is facing a problem. There are various studies over the years that prove that there are recruitment concerns, there are training concerns, there are performance concerns. We all believe that we are excellent communicators. But according to the industry, according to the people who hire you, according to the people who train you, according to the people who assess your work, these people feel that management graduates just do not know how to use the skills they claim to have. You say, yes, I am good with finance, I am good with marketing, I am good at convincing people, I am good at this, I am good at that, but you are not able to convince the people you deal with. So they feel that management graduates just do not know how to use the skills they claim to have. You claim to be able to do A, B and C, but you are not able to convince the people who are affected by what you claim to do. And they are frustrated, and these people in the industry say, what are business schools teaching their students these days? Okay, intercultural communication competence. Intercultural communication competence is an impression that behavior is appropriate and effective in a given context. This is the reason why we need to study intercultural communication competence, business communication competence, and within business, I think I have already made a case for why intercultural communication is such an integral part of business. So, let us talk about intercultural communication competence. According to Spitzberg, intercultural communication competence is an impression that behavior is appropriate and effective in a given context. Appropriateness means that the values, norms and that the valued rules, norms and expectancies of the relationship are not violated significantly. Okay. Effectiveness is the accomplishment of valued goals or rewards relative to costs and alternatives. So, appropriateness is the fitness of any type of communication in the situation. How well does the type of communication fit into the situation, or how well has the communication happened? And effectiveness is how well has the goal of the communication been achieved. Communication that is inappropriate and ineffective is of course completely low quality. Communication that is appropriate but ineffective suggests a social chameleon who does nothing but also accomplishes no personal objectives through interaction. So, somebody who is socially very right, but eventually the type of work that this person does is really not worth anything. Communication that is inappropriate but effective would include such behaviors as lying, cheating, stealing and other socially inappropriate behaviors that get the work done, but the messages that are clearly ethically problematic. Okay. So, there could be ethical issues, there could also be some social the norms issues. You know, you talk about people who are experts at their work, so and so is excellent in at work, but when you come to the social skills, the person just doesn't know how to behave. So, we have such people in our environments wherever we go, and things could be ethically, morally also wrong, that are not really fitting in, and this is according to Spitzberg 1994. Spitzberg proposed an integrative model of intercultural competence, and I will try and cover this entire model in this class. And let me just show you this model. According to this model, there are two people in the interaction. There is an actor and the co-actor, not a sender and a receiver. It is the actor and the co-actor, and if you see, this part of the slide is a mirror. This part of the slide is a mirror image of this part. It's just slightly up here. Okay. So, this shows that there is some sort of difference, some movement in the communication. Motivation, reward, personal objectives and goals and anxiety. There are skills, there are knowledge functions, and there are outcomes. As far as the co-actors, there is an episode in which the interaction takes place, and based on all of these things, these skills come into picture, and the composure, interaction management, alter-centrism and effectiveness of communication is sent out into the communication episode, and it feeds into the co-actors environment. So, just study this part, and I will explain this part in the future slides. Just take a minute to read this entire model, and this model is from a book that I had shown you in the first class, and this is the book right here. Okay, this is the model that I had scanned and put up on the slide, and this is the book, Intercultural Communication, a Reader, 7th edition by Larry Samovar and Richard Porter. Okay. So, this is a very good book, and it is a collection of research articles, and I suggest if you can find this book or a later edition, you must buy it. So, just take a minute to study this slide. Okay. The model portrays the process of dyadic interaction as a function of two individuals' motivation to communication, knowledge of communication in that context, and skills in implementing their motivation and knowledge. So, according to Spitzberg, there are three factors, there are three things that influence how well a person or how well the relational communication happens. The first factor here is motivation, whether you want to communicate or not. Okay. What makes you communicate with person X? Knowledge of communication in that context, what must you do to communicate with that person in that situation, and the skills in implementing their motivation and knowledge, and how well are you equipped to first tap into your urge to communicate, and how much do you know about the situation and the person to communicate with them in that situation. Systems, the three systems that this model deals with in relational competence are the individual system, which is the left part of the slide. So, this is the individual system. The actor, co-actor are treated as individuals. There is, and the second is the episodic system, which is the central part, which is the place where you see this mixture of arrows, and the relational system that includes those components that assist a person's competence across the entire span of relationships rather than just in a given episode of interaction. And we will talk about each of these systems separately. The individual system, according to Spitzberg, in the individual system, as the communicator motivation increases, the communicative competence increases. As the communicator, and even this has 4 different parts to it. As the communicator confidence increases, the communicative competence increases. And the confidence of a communicator depends upon the social anxiety. How anxious you are. If you are not anxious, you will be more confident and you will be more keen to communicate with the other person. The familiarity with the situation. So, sameness of the situation. So, if you are unfamiliar to the situation or unfamiliar to the person you are interacting with, then your anxiety could go up. These things are interrelated, and that could have a negative impact on your confidence and the importance or consequences of the encounter. What will happen if the encounter does not go well? Consequences are what can go wrong and what will happen if things do not go the way they are supposed to go. The next thing that affects the communicator motivation is the reward relevant efficacy beliefs. So, how well do you relate the reward to your efficiency, okay? And these reward relevant efficacy beliefs can be task specific, whether you think you are good at that task or not, and are correlated to familiarity with the tasks and the contexts. So, these beliefs, what do I believe about the reward that will come if the communication is successful, and that depends upon whether I am familiar with the task and the context in which the task is taking place. The third thing here is communicator approach dispositions, okay. So, what mindset do I approach the situation in? And then the higher the communicator approach dispositions, the more keen I am to approach the context, the more keen I am to approach the interaction, the higher my confidence level will be, and the higher my communicative competence will be. If I feel uncomfortable approaching a situation, I will not, my confidence will go down, and that will have a negative impact on my competence. Okay. The fourth one is relative cost benefit ratio of a situation. This is related to point B. So, what is the cost to me? What am I losing by going into the situation, or how much effort do I need to put in when I go into the situation, and what is the benefit I get out of it? Okay. Now, I will give you my example. When I come into this situation, when I decided to take up this opportunity of recording lectures for the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning, the cost was clarity in my own subject, which meant I thought I was clear. I have been teaching this subject for the 4th time now, and this is the 4th run of the subject. This is my 4th year in teaching. So, I said I know the subject like the back of my hand, and I studied intercultural communication, and I have been in intercultural situations since 1997, which is about 13 years now. So, you know, very highly intercultural situation. So, I said, well, I think I am an expert, okay, and I want to try out something new. And so, as far as I was concerned, when I decided to apply for this opportunity, the cost was not very high. I said, yes, I have the expertise and I have the resources to get additional information that I can share with the students through this course. And so, the cost was a lot of work preparing these lectures, because I knew I would be talking to an empty room. And I do not know if the camera can do this, but if you were here, you would see that I am in my mind, I am imagining people sitting on these chairs. I am not really addressing a real class. And so, initially I was a little uncomfortable about the thought of talking to an empty class, but I knew myself and I said, well, I know the subject, I will just start talking about it, and I will imagine, I will assume that there is somebody sitting there. The benefit, cost was anxiety, cost was work that went into putting the lectures together, cost was reading up additional stuff, cost was additional teaching load. This is additional teaching load. So, in addition to the administrative tasks that I already have, in addition to the teaching load that I already have, this is additional load. The benefit here is, by talking to an empty class, by talking to the audience that I have never met, I am forced to clarify concepts in my mind before I even present them. I am also forced to come up with very, very appropriate, socially relevant examples. Now, when I am in class, my assumption, the first thing I ask my class is, can you understand Hindi? My mother tongue is Hindi, Punjabi, Urdu mixed. So, I have a tendency to switch in class. I have a tendency to switch from Hindi to English, English to Hindi once in a while, depending on what I am trying to explain. I am fluent in all languages, but I have a tendency to go to the colloquial part just to explain something really well. Here I don't know who will be listening to this. So, once in rarely can I take those examples that I think you will understand. In addition to that, if I talk about things specifically Indian, I have to make a special effort to clarify them. In my class, if there is an international student sitting, I explain it to that student and move on. But here I have to explain every concept so that you get a feel of it. So, the cost and benefit, but the benefit is higher. The benefit is the clarity I will get, and of course, this looks great on my resume, no doubt about that. You know, so this is a good addition to my career profile, and so, you know, depending, and that has in turn affected my approach to this. I am keen on experiencing new situations. I am not scared of failure. At the most, what will happen? You will not like this lecture, or the reviewers of this lecture will ask me to redo this part. Big deal. It's not a lot of, it doesn't put pressure on me. It will help me improve my teaching style. So, I assess what I can gain and what can go wrong, and then decide whether to go into a situation like this. Now, if I were asked to prepare, or if I were asked to present the explanation of Spitzberg's model impromptu, without having a chance to read through it or internalize the concepts to a person who would decide my promotion, I would be apprehensive. I have had a chance to revise this, I have had a chance to put in about 6 to 8 hours of reading into preparing this lecture, so I am comfortable with it. But, and even though I had learnt this, I got a chance to prepare for it before coming to this class. But just imagine if I had to prepare for this before I came for today's lecture, it would make things more difficult for me. The next thing here is, as communicative knowledge increases, communicative competence decreases. And the things that affect communicative knowledge are task relevant procedural knowledge. As a person's exposure to a culture increases, his or her stores of relevant subject matters, topics, language forms and so on, as well as procedural competencies are likely to increase. This is the first time I am working in a government organization. I have had an experience with private organizations, I have had an experience with a contract position in a government organization, but I I started teaching in a permanent role, or I got absorbed as a permanent employee at IIT only about 1.5 years ago, and before that I was on contract, but it was more like a permanent thing. So, this is the first time, and initially my interactions were, I was quite hesitant, and a lot of times I did things wrong. Even today I had to redo something, you know, redo the whole procedure, and I had to explain that there were confusions, and people said this is normal here, you have done this for the first time and you could have gone wrong, but I had to redo a couple of things in the past 2-3 days. So, the task relevant procedural knowledge was less. The next time I have to do the same things, it will be more. So, there are my familiarity with the procedure, my comfort level with the procedure will be better. The first time I am lost, I don't know who to contact, I don't know what to ask them, I don't know whether to let them know that I was confused. After all, I have the rule book with me, I have the policies and procedures, but it's this thick fat book and I don't know which section would cover what. So, I was quite apprehensive, and luckily we have a very supportive administrative office. So, every time I have a problem I call them up, and they are very kind enough to take my calls maybe 20 times a day sometimes. But you know, slowly those things will be, I won't be sounding so unsure. The other thing that that affects communicative competence, the communicative knowledge in that further in turn affects communicative competence, is the mastery of knowledge acquisition strategies in new or different situations. how do you acquire new knowledge? That is another factor that affects how you use that knowledge and how competently you are able to communicate. So, how do you acquire that knowledge? And so the mastery of knowledge acquisition strategies is very, very important. Another thing that affects things, your knowledge and the use of your knowledge, communicative knowledge, is the identity and role diversity. And this is something very, very common. It may seem like a strange phrase or a new phrase to you, but just think, in your day-to-day interactions, don't you say so and so has a lot of experience, so and so is widely traveled, so and so has lived in different parts of the country, so and so must be better at communication. I grew up in Himachal, I have lived in Chandigarh, I have lived in Gujarat, I have lived in Delhi now, and I have lived for a little while in Maharashtra, and now I am living in Bengal for the past 2+ years, and I have lived abroad. So, taking all these experiences into account, I feel more comfortable. My communicative knowledge has increased, and the number of roles I play as we grow up, from being a daughter or a son, you get into playing the role of a sibling, brother or sister. Then you have cousins or your immediate siblings who get married. So, you are a brother-in-law or a sister-in-law, and then they have children. So, you become a brother, an aunt or an uncle, and you are somebody's grandson or granddaughter, and you are somebody's niece or nephew. These are the personal relationships. Work-wise or professionally, you are a student, and in your school you could be the team leader, you could be the group captain, you could be the sports leader, you could be the class monitor. So, these are different hats that we all wear, and the larger, the greater the number of hats you wear at one time, or the greater the types of hats you have worn during your life, the better you get at communicating in different situations. The better you are at knowing what to do when you are given a new role to play, and then you go out and work, and then when you grow up, you travel, you get admission into a different college in a different city, so you become a traveler, and there you have to act all smart. Your first journey, just think of the first journey you undertook. Did you not find yourself referring to your experiences with your parents and how they dealt with, say, the tea vendor or the person who brought, the first time you tried negotiating or bargaining in the market? So, did you not refer to your experiences with your parents, the way you saw them doing things, and then you developed your own styles? Some things that they did may not work in a situation that is different. So, you develop your own style and you start doing some things that are similar to your past experiences and some things that are very, very unique to you as a person and to your specific environments. And that is what we mean by identity and role diversity. The diversity of experiences each one of us goes through and the diversity of roles each one of us plays, and that is why I keep insisting that intercultural communication is inevitable in today's world, because the number and the quality or the types of experiences that we go through are very, very different in today's world, and everybody brings with them this diversity, this plethora of experiences to the table when they interact with each other, and every experience, however small, teaches you something. Okay. The next thing is knowledge dispositions, which is possessing information and knowing how to analyze and process that information. It's not only having information. That's what I talked about a little while ago. When the managers say that you have a nice degree from an IIT or an IIM or some NIT. These days NITs are doing excellent work, they are under the radar, but they do excellent work. And so, you have a nice degree or you have worked with a person who is known for the quality of his or her work. So, people say you bring all these credentials, and then when you start expressing your knowledge, they are not so sure about your competence. Okay. So, excuse me. Okay. Another thing in the individual system is, as communicator skills increase, communicator competence increases. Now, in addition to our knowledge, in addition to our confidence, in addition to our motivation, we also have skills. These are the three things that we talked about earlier. And as far as our skills are concerned, communication skills are concerned, these depend upon conversational alter-centrism. You've heard of the term egocentric, which means I, me, myself, focus on me alone. But when I talk about alter-centrism, alter means the other, and centrism means to focus upon the other. And this is the responsiveness to the other person. And in a country like, again, you know, I find myself referring back to high and low context cultures, and then I forget that I have not talked to you about those, but I will soon enough. So in collectivistic cultures, in community oriented cultures, where you are a part of a community, where you are very relationship oriented, in rural areas especially, or in semi-urban areas, in traditional cultures, we have a tendency to focus on the other person mentally. But do we do that in our conversations? So as the conversational alter-centrism increases, the communicator, it adds to the competence level, but only up to a certain level. If you're totally alter-centric, then it backfires. So there has to be a balance. Okay. Conversational coordination. Conversational coordination is all those behaviors that assist in the smooth flow of an interactional encounter. So how well do you coordinate the nexting process? I think I talked to you about nexting. Nexting is what happens next in any communication situation. What do you say that enables or that motivates or that stimulates the receiver of your message to respond in a manner that you want that person to respond to? And coordination is how well do you fit in this nexting with the other person's nexting process. So how well do you fit in both your nexting processes? How smooth or how clear that chain of communication events is. The third thing here is conversational composure, which is your calmness and confidence during conversation. How composed are you? Are you jerky? Are you always overreacting, too happy, too sad, or are you just dull like this? So calmness and composure is another thing. I mean, do you pace yourself? Do you have a consistent flow of energy? If it's depending on where you are, if you are on the stage, you may need to have a larger amount of energy. If you are talking to people who are, if you're sitting down, the amount of energy is less. If I were sitting down and teaching this lecture, I would probably not be moving around so much. I wouldn't be able to, and I wouldn't be moving my hands so much, but because I'm standing, I am expected to have a larger amount of energy. So that is one. And so this is the, I mean, how well do you appear to be calm and composed during your conversation. The last thing here is conversational adaptation, which is altering and balancing self's goals and intentions to those of the other person, not the extremes of alter-centrism or egocentrism. Conversational adaptation, which means how well do you balance egocentric and alter-centric behavior. How well are you able to balance the focus on yourself and your focus on the other during a conversation. It shouldn't be totally egocentric. I should not try and bring every conversation to myself. At the same time, I should not take all my conversation and focus completely on the other person. That results in the other person's perception or interpretation of my behavior as being either submissive or having low self-worth or low self-esteem. Again, this depends on the situation, but there has to be a balance. You know, all this is done in a context. It has to be in a context. It has to be in line with the goals of the context. It has to be in line with your goals, with the receiver's goals. So it's all this big murky mess. You know, it's this chaos of ideas and concepts and factors constantly influencing the message. It's not a smooth flow. It's not like, you know, electricity traveling from one end of the wire to the other end. It's not like that. It is a complete, it has to be done in a manner that, you know, there is a smooth flow, but all these flows are influenced by so many things. It's like trying to send a beam of light through an not opaque but a translucent fluid. So it spreads out, the light sort of spreads out, it's not smooth, it's like there are things, you know, the color of the light changes, and you have a beam of white light and you're trying to send that beam of white light through a translucent fluid, and there is some spreading, some dispersion of the light, and yes, eventually it reaches where it's supposed to reach if it's strong enough, but there's some amount of coloring in it. So that is what conversational adaptation is. How well do you balance your focus? This is, sorry, the example of the light traveling through a translucent fluid was appropriate for the context. That is how the context affects your conversation. That is how the context affects a message. And conversational adaptation is the navigation through that translucent fluid and the strength of that beam of light. Okay. I want you to think about two things now till your next class, and in the next class we will complete the discussion about communicative competence, but for the next class, before the next class, I want you to think about 2 points here. First, I want you to identify your own biases and identify how you attribute your experiences with your in-group and out-group members. So, I want you to think about how you shape your messages in your in-group. I want you to think about how you shape your messages with your out-group and what affects the way you shape these messages. I also want you to identify what makes you tick as a communicator. I want you to introspect and list the intrapersonal factors that motivate you to keep going in your interactions in different situations. So, these are your tasks, these are the questions for this class, and I want you to think about these things and discuss them with your friends, and I will give you some more food for thought in the next class. Thank you.